If you have too many indices, it is confusing to the people to get a sense of what's happening. It's also confusing for the policymakers. So with all the deficiencies, it is inevitable that for the country as a whole, there will be one index. If you start differentiating, there can be multiple. That doesn't help anyone. So if you are thinking of only the question of taxes, so that is more a local issue, local government. So that is different. But I think overall, it's necessary to have one index. In fact, we had a problem when we were working in the Reserve Bank of India. We pleaded for a single index, simple index, common consumer price index. We have got it now a few years ago. So the simple answer is, in fact, inflation index conceals the quality increases, the productivity, the quality increases. A fan is not a fan. 5 years back, the fan was a different quality than now. But for inflation index, you still have to have the fan, the price of the fan, right? So you have many aspects of inflation. So I agree that an inflation index for the country as a whole has a lot of deficiencies. But that's the only workable way in which we can proceed. You can refine for purpose of local taxes or local, but for macro policy, you require one index of inflation. Even for purpose of business, if you want to link it to for instance, if you are giving house for a rent, you want to link it to inflation, then you should give one index all over the country because the contract in economy is one integrated one. So therefore, my short answer is yes, there are differences, which are for many reasons, but one index, particularly consumer price index, should be the policy rate. You may have other aspects, producer price index or something like that, but for purpose of policy, only one index is necessary, absolutely necessary. The third question is, one of the famous paradox of economics is the inflation growth trade-off. Often the Reserve Bank of India governor is in a dilemma of targeting inflation and at the same time maintaining the growth. Targets set by the finance ministry, and these are often counter-cyclical in nature. What are the measures taken by RBI to ensure the right balance between inflation and growth? Of course, currently only Dr. Raghuram Rajan can answer that question. But from my side, let me again give you an incident. Normally, when I was governor, I avoid sharing the same platform with the finance minister. Because if I'm just there and if you say something which I don't agree, I can't get up and say I don't agree. If I'm there, everybody will assume that I agree. So best thing is absent yourself. That's what I was doing. On one occasion, that was not possible. There was a fund bank meeting in Singapore, and the High Commissioner gave a dinner. When the High Commissioner gave a dinner in Singapore, he invited the governor and the minister. So both of us had to go there. Even then, I did not share that. I insisted on sitting at the dining table. And after in the question answer session, one of the industrialists got up and said, now that I could be able to catch the governor and the finance minister in the same hall, he said that I want to know, the governor keeps talking of inflation problems, and then the finance minister says something, there's one signal here, one signal there, it's very confusing, since both of you are here, I want an answer. So then the finance minister, typical politician, he said, Governor RBI will answer. So then I said, I agree with the finance minister, whatever he is going to say. So then the finance minister said, gentlemen, what is the problem? What's your problem? Governor is assuring you financial stability. He is delivering financial stability. I am assuring you growth. I am delivering growth. What is your problem? Why do you bother what you are talking? We are delivering what is your notion. So in essence, there is nothing really like a trade-off. There is nothing like a trade-off. If inflation is very high, if not today, tomorrow growth will be affected. So they are interlinked. Growth and inflation are interlinked. But the slight difference is with a time perspective. Time perspective is that if possible, when are next elections? 2000, whatever it is. Let's say elections are 2 years hence. If the elections are after 1 or 2 years, then the emphasis the government will say, assuming that inflation is not too, have more growth. If the inflation comes later. From his point of view, short term is important. But the Reserve Bank has been created only to take care of the long term. The whole purpose of having RBI, what's the purpose of having a central bank? It's created by the government. It's actually created by the government. It's created by the government to be able to assure the people that look, the issues like inflation, creating money, it is not with me, it's independent body, it's a very technical body. That's what they want to tell you. But inside they want us to do whatever they want us to do. So that's the problem. So they want people to be convinced that it is independent. But at the same time, they would like as much as possible for the RBI to toe them. The RBI, in order to maintain its credibility before the public, has to argue and accept its independence. But beyond the point, it cannot be independent. So, for this basic issue, therefore, is that the Reserve Bank of India is independent to the extent it is permitted by the government to be independent. So the only issue is what is the law and what is the practice. So actually in India, and I was mentioning yesterday also, according to law, RBI is one of the least independent central banks in the world. The governor and deputy governor can be dismissed within 1 minute. The whole board is appointed by the government. It has a lot of relationships with the government. Public sector banks are owned by the government. If the RBI takes a decision, the banks don't cooperate, then there's no monetary transmission. But in reality, RBI is very independent because the tradition, the respect, the professionalism, particularly in emerging market economies, in the last 50, 60 years, this is one country where inflation has been reasonably under control, where there has not been serious crisis. So monetary management, RBI has a reputation which is built over the years. Therefore, even the political leadership, every time you can see even the recent discussion, they go somewhere, then everybody criticizes, no, we are not affecting the independence, we are only trying to promote collaboration. So that's the difference between law and practice. So my limited point is, yes, there's a different role, there's a short term, there's a long term, and there are different considerations, external, domestic. In this balance, the Reserve Bank has something to contribute. So at certain occasions, they must collaborate. So in a way, but big objective has to be given only by the elected government. RBI cannot decide its own objectives because it's a technical body. So the objectives are determined by the government. On operations, the RBI should have autonomy. And in that autonomy, if the government tries to intervene, the RBI says, no, don't tell me it's 0.25 or 0.5. What is inflation? If that is the target, leave it to me where it's 0.25. That's called operational autonomy. Second, policies. Suppose there is a financial bubble, and if the government is adding to the bubble, then it becomes very difficult for RBI to control. So sometimes it has to do the counter. Sometimes they have to harmonize. So in operations, RBI will have independence, not in objective. In policies, there should be some sort of harmonization, either countervailing or supporting, depending on the circumstance. Then structural transformation. If the economy has to have structural transformation, and for a developing country like India, the structures have to change. Banking regulation acts has to be amended. Then the structural change comes. The structural change can be done only when there is cooperation. How can a law be passed on related to the financial sector without the government? Unless a law is passed, there is no structural transformation. But for a law to be sensible, the government has to consult the RBI because it has the expertise. So 3 words in regard to the issue of independence is operational autonomy, harmonizing policies, coordination in structural change. Is that okay? Then we come to microfinance. There's reference to how, in your view, the banks can India promote microfinancing, especially to Indian farmers. I thought Syndicate Bank was the best example historically, though after nationalization it hasn't done much because of a variety of all India policies. But I think the fact remains that microfinance, and basically you have to make a distinction between financial services. My standard saying is that a good system is where the servant maid can keep her savings safe from her drunken husband. So where they won't keep it. So in fact, safe place to keep deposits is very much important. Second is consumption smoothing. You get work for some days, you don't get work for some days, your son goes and works, husband goes and works, they should be able to remit, you should be able to get money. Because it's seasonal employment, in fact. So these are the major aspects. Whenever you are thinking of credit, then somebody is taking a risk. So there we have to be a little more careful, it has to be integrated with so many other things. So what we have been trying to say now, the government with its payment banks, etc., the government also is insisting that it's not microfinance doesn't mean simply giving microcredit. It's the totality of the financial services, that is the financial inclusion. And now it is very clearly established with the history, particularly in our country of the last 40, 50 years, the banking system by itself is not able to, a traditional banking system is not able to deliver, but we have got the advantage of the technology now. Though the business correspondent model, which was originated by Syndicate Bank, was subsequently adopted by government of Reserve Bank in 2005. So basically my suggestion is that we should now start thinking beyond traditional banking institutions, beyond brick and mortar banking, and beyond micro. It should take a more integrated view of the relationship between finance and development. In that, there is a slight difference. Till global financial crisis, many people thought that if financial sector develops, economy will develop. But now they have realized that financial sector can enable, can support, but cannot lead economy. So that is the major realization after the global finance. So in this case also, if you are not able to get enough money to have food, where is the question of having a bank account? So we have to recognize that microfinance and financial inclusion is cannot substitute for poverty alleviation programs or poverty alleviation. So we must say that there is a role, important role, but it has to be supplemented with others if it has to be sustainable. Then there is the next question is, external debt has increased to 24% of the GDP. Out of this, 39% is maturing within 1 year. It can create volatility in the financial market. What can RBI do to manage this situation? I think first, is there a difference between external debt and domestic debt? Anybody?
Yes, sir.
What is the difference?
So it's the currency.
Pardon?
So the currency. So the currency.
Yes. External debt is that obligation in currency. Okay.
Currency.
Partly correct. Okay, I'll explain. Okay, second. Domestic, only currency. See, generally external debt is something that is owed to non-residents, technically, but essentially it's currency. But for instance, for USA, it's a dollar denominated, so currency denominated, whether it is domestic or external. But in general, for a country like India, there are two important aspects of external debt. One is, it is in a currency other than your own currency. Second, it is held by non-residents. So there are two issues which come up. For us, but second, external debt is debt of government or non-government also? Pardon? Yes. External debt is the debt of government and other. So in a way, it is part of the national balance sheet. Whenever you talk of domestic debt, what do we talk of? Government debt. Domestic debt is generally we talk of leverage, the corporate leverage. So that's a different concept. So we should not mix up the two. But if the government incurs a lot of external debt, then the government has a bigger risk. The government has a risk. If it is a country, if there is a government which cannot raise money in its own currency outside the country, it is vulnerable. Okay. So this is the broad picture. And one of the things that has been realized is, particularly in Latin America, to some extent East Asia, is that external debt can be a source of worry. And this 1 year residual maturity was introduced by Alan Greenspan, but actually before that Dr. Rangarajan propounded the difference between debt and equity flows in debt, short term and long term, and maturity. So in that sense, the question is right. It's not whether it's 30% or 35%, but what is the level of debt? So in the totality of the balance sheet of the external sector, you have got government, you have got private sector, you have got debt, you have got equity. You have got also, Indians also have assets abroad and liabilities. So if you take a totality of the picture, then what happens is the issue of vulnerability or management volatility, this issue arises in terms of the extent to which the government in a developing country, not in advanced economies because they are different, in developing countries, your reserves should be enough to be able to take care of the volatility. It cannot be able to change the direction. So therefore, whenever you say that short-term maturity debt is high, it's not a percentage of GDP. What you have to say is that what is the total external liabilities which are maturing for payment in the next 1 year. That amount relative to the reserves. So that is the sense of comfort. But overall, I think it's very nice question put. You must always be conscious of the debt obligations because they are contractual obligations. And particularly in the case of government, it's a sovereign. There's no question of defaulting. If it's a simple company, you can still say that